Mike, are you queued up?
Yep.
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 All right.
Since Aiden is dying to see some MobX here. All right. You see my screen?
Oh yeah.
All right. Okay, so we are not talking about VR, although it is pretty cool. We are using the model viewer web component that's provided by Google, which is just a stellar web component, which if you're not familiar with it, you can provide a 3D asset that's done in something like Blender or Unity, and you can run it through the model viewer tag and basically just point to this 3D file, and all of a sudden you have a little VR environment to view your asset in. It's pretty cool. One of the features that they just added was this annotation concept, where if you notice, no matter where I'm rotating in 3D space, this little annotation knows exactly where to follow to provide a little label for this 3D asset. So at the College of Science, we have this, we've scanned a lot of bones. And what we want to provide the students is the ability to really zoom in on these bones that are all hot spotted, so that they can see, all of these little dimples. It's kind of hard in here. Maybe this one is a better example. Like the dimples in the bones, they actually all have names to them, and the ridges in the bones, they actually all have names. So this, we think, could be much better than just seeing 2D assets on the screen. This is a much better learning experience for the students. But we find is that some of these hotspots can get absolutely insane. So now we can scroll around and see, but you can see that this is just not the best experience right now. It's just too overwhelming. It's just too many hotspots. So we had the idea of, okay, well, why don't we just show all of the hotspots on the left-hand side of the screen here, and hide the hotspots by default. So that sounds easy enough. Until you look at how this is actually constructed here, how we are viewing this this little app. So this is our app. It's made up of a new web component that we're working on called MV Studio. And what MV Studio does is very simple. It's just a wrapper that you put around Model Viewer. And the whole idea is we just want to give a really custom experience for the Model Viewer web components, where you can maybe on the fly select different files, and the MV Studio app will delete everything in the slot here, and maybe go make an AJAX call, come back with the new model viewer code and inject it, and then you can view a new bone. So if we look into that code to see how we might go gather all those labels, here is the code for that MV Studio app. So not a lot to it. We basically just have the slot where the model viewer tag and all of its tags will go. And then we hopefully will show all of our hotspots in a panel, which again will hopefully be over here on the left. So a little list of all the hotspots to the left. So what we have to do here is, just gonna delete this real quick, is let's do a little experiment in getting querying inside of the shadow DOM, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up right off the bat when learning web components. So let's say I want to get a list of all the buttons that should be showing up in the slot. So the first thing I would do is say, whenever this component is first updated, I'm going to tap into that life cycle with this is a lit element. So lit element has a life cycle for the renderer has first been updated. I'm going to say this dot shadow root. So if I say this dot shadow root, and of course, what's going on? Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong. 1 second. There we go. This is my demo here. All right, so this is the bone. It has 2 hotspots on it. And here's our console. So we can see, okay, well, here's our shadow root. So, I mean, this looks pretty easy. It looks like I can just start querying in here. There's the model viewer. So should be able to just query selector for model viewer. And I don't get anything. All right, so the reason why you're not getting anything is because we're actually at the root of a shadow DOM, and we have to do something real quick first. The first thing we have to do is actually search for this slot tag that's right here. Because once we search for the slot tag, then we can sort of inspect it and see all the children that are inside of that slot tag. So what we do is not do query selector. I'd probably do query selector, and I'd query select the slot tag, which is right here. And once that loads, okay, so now I have the slot tag. And now that I'm at the slot tag, now I can do the query select all, right? So I'll do model viewer. So not just yet. So what we have to do is call a function that this slot has. It's called assigned nodes. And by calling assigned nodes, it's going to take a look inside of its shadow root and collect all of the collect all the elements that are right underneath it. And so in this case, we started here, we went to the shadow root that's inside MV Studio app, and then we ended up at model viewer. All right, so what I would like to do is get a list of all these buttons, right? So now what do we do? Well, if we take a look here, so what assigned nodes, so by querying the slot tag and then asking for the assigned nodes inside of it, we get an array of the children that we can access. So I'm just going to do something quick and dirty here. I'm going to ask for the second item in that array, which is the model viewer here. So now that I've arrived here, now I can actually do what I tried to do from the beginning and do a query selector all for all those buttons, all those hotspots. And now I have a list of those hotspots. All right. So now what I could do is, well, I won't assign those yet, but so you might find yourself in this scenario quite a bit. There's lots of different methods for accessing children or asking for children through shadow roots. This is one of them. I'm sure there's a ton of different opinions on whether the effectiveness in this of this or the how performant it is. I don't know, to be honest. I'd like to hear that discussion. But I often find myself in this exact scenario where I just kind of want to do a old school jQuery style, collect all the buttons. I don't care if we're in the shadow root or what. I just need to know all the children that I need through shadow roots or no shadow roots. So I worked on this little utility function that's just horribly named right here. It's called find all deep. But the basic idea is that you would use it in the way that you would be familiar with, where you would say, okay, well, can I find, I'll say find all deep, and then I'll pass it all of the shadow root or the slot exactly where I want you to start searching. And then I'm gonna pass you the CSS selector that I would like you to search on. And what this function does is it's a recursive function. So it's going to first go to the slot that you provided it, and it's going to gather up all those assigned nodes that we did in that previous example. And it's going to loop over all those assigned nodes, and it's going to run our query to try to find all of those CSS selectors that we were asking for. So in this case, it's we're looking for, like, all these buttons have attributes, slot attributes that are named with their unique hotspot name. So that's what we're looking for, that pattern that tells us if it's a hotspot or not. So in our recursive function, we're going to loop over all the children. We're going to say, do you have the ability to run query selector? Because sometimes it will return with some items in the shadow root that aren't really divs. But that's, I'm not going to get into that right now. But basically, can you try to find some children? If you can, run the selector and record all of the items that you found. So if you found any hotspots at this layer of the shadow DOM, record them. So we're going to add it to this overall nodes array. And then what we're going to do is say, if I, well, first of all, I added a depth option. So you can choose to say, like, only run this over 2 or 3 shadow roots, so it doesn't get absolutely nuts. But if we haven't hit our depth limit that the user specified, and if I run this query selector for another slot tag, so we're asking for, give me all the, search for all the slot tags in the children. If those return with more slots, then we're gonna run this function over again. So it's just gonna keep running and running and running and running. So it's gonna run through your whole DOM, run through all of the shadow roots it can find. And once there are no more shadow roots to find, it's gonna return a list of all nodes. So instead of doing that first massive query selector that we first started with, what we can do is now replace it with this little utility function. If I console log hotspots, it now returns with the correct number of hotspots, which is awesome. So I can say, using mobx, I can save those hotspots to the store. And we now get a list over here of our 2 hotspot items. So if I add demo and I add another one, center lens, now it should find center lens. So here I put this little recursive function on a gist, so I will share that in the chat. And that is all I had. So that is a little crash course in searching through the shadow DOM for some selectors. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, which is why people used Polymer back with like Polymer 1 and 2, because they had helper functions that would do very similar types of things, but be able to resolve the difference between polyfill and not polyfill.
Right.
Because I wonder if that would even work in a polyfill context, although, you know, increasingly we're just saying, oh, well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's the current scenario for this specific application. But let's see. Oh yeah, Tom is telling me that my audio is bad. That's because the wind knocked my internet over.
That's a whole episode that we need to dedicate to what your setup is for that. It's not web components related, but it is super interesting.
It involved kites, right? Right, Potter?
Yes.
Kites and strings and cans.
Yeah. Someone was flying another kite, interfered with my signal.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about?
Yeah. So this is really cool. So it looks like a really interesting new option in like the virtual manipulative space, right? So
Yeah.
question, how do those hotspots, how do you get those in there, so to speak?
So right now, you have to basically place them in there by hand, and it's really not the best experience. So that being said, so like whenever I say place them in there by hand,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure how they expect you to do this, but you basically have to know the exact vector position that you want to hotspot, which maybe their workflow is you created this asset in Blender. So maybe you go into Blender and you can derive the position from that application. But you're expected to fill this data position, this vector value by hand, all right? So an alternative to that my team's been working on is the Model Viewer Studio little editor. And what that would look like is, if I go into the demo and I run well, let me see if I have this so I don't download the internet. And I run this MV Studio tool against the index.html. Now, if I load this up, please work. This is not working right now. So what we're working on is a little in-place editor for this. So you would use the MV Studio CLI, and it would pop open a web page, and it would show the Model Viewer Studio tag in there. But then you'd also have editing controls where you would say add hotspot, and whenever you click add hotspot, you would actually click somewhere on the model, and this MV Studio tool would add it to your HTML, basically update your HTML for you with the correct vector information. So that's still very much in early development, but it's allowed our 3D artists to label all of these in HTML. So
very cool. And
Yeah.
what are you using to scan the bones?
He used a some high-end scanner. I forget what it is. I think Anthropology has it. It's like this $40,000 handheld scanner. So he's worked with a team in biology to scan all these bones by hand.
All right, very cool.
Yeah.
All righty. If there's no more questions for Mike and his key attached to a kite that's powering his house when it gets struck by lightning,